word to begin. So again, so glad Pastor Chris can share with us on the United Methodist Foundation, their impact, and that we've already celebrated a way that directly helped our church with our support of press over the many years, as well as estate planning and leveraging estate planning for charitable giving. Art Muir was a past board member of the NIC United Methodist Foundation. And Art, would you like to say a word to begin our adult forum?
I guess the answer to that question would be yes. No, I was on board for a long time prior to Chris' appointment as the chair and the CEO. And I watched this. Actually, I think I was there when after Lisa. I think Lisa was the predecessor from the chair. Is that right?
Yep.
And Dick Heiss was actually the president at that time, and then Harry Nichols for a long time. And I watched this foundation grow, and it's now really taken off under Chris's leadership. It's actually, I think the assets under management were maybe 60 million or something like that when I was there. Now they're over 100. I think is that somewhere in that.
Almost got there.
Huh?
We almost got there.
Oh, I can't quite say. Well, we need somebody to write a check. So.
Boy, I know what I'm gonna ask for next year.
And again, Chris is going to talk about what it does. But one of the things that I remember in particular that I enjoyed, and I thought was, I think, really one of the real highlights of the year is every year the foundation sets aside a pot of money. It's a modest amount considering the the size of the fund, but it comes out of the profitability, the profits of the earnings of the foundation. And what it does is it then provides grants to small operations that are doing good work in the community, mostly in Chicago. But I think, as Barb was saying, one was for press this year. And so there's a meeting every year in which the recipients come, and then there's a award ceremony where the checks are given to them, but there's also an explanation of what they do. And you cannot believe what these people are doing with this money. There were all kinds of things. There were things that churches that were holding assemblies for young people in the city, inner city, doing plays about gun violence. There were things about things like pantries that people were starting. There were educational things. All these things, and the amount of money was, sometimes it was as little as $300 or $500. Once in a while, it was for 500 to 1,000, maybe over 3 years. But I don't know what the policy is now, but at the time it was, you wouldn't get these for more than 3 years. The idea was seed money. And it's exactly what Chris was talking about. You would hear what these people would do. They'd take $500 and turn it into this huge accomplishment. It was a stunning thing. So the foundation, I hope, is still doing that. I assume that it still is. And they're spreading the point is they're spreading lots of seeds out there. So they do a great job with that.
Great tie into our message today.
Lots of bird dropping.
Pastor Chris, take it away.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it's with us for a while.
Before we begin, if you would indulge me, I'd like to pass around my folder, and if you could put your first and last name and your email address. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. But I would like to put you on the Gift Legacy e-newsletter that goes out once a month, every first Saturday morning, and that comes from our Plain Giving website. And you can always opt out of that if you want to. On the bottom of the email, you can just unsubscribe if you want. It's very harmless. It's once a month. We have about 2,500 people on there, I think, and it's just good for you to get some information that comes out from the Plain Giving website, and then I try to put a message of encouragement in there here and there every month. And then that way I can know too who was participating this morning. So I'll pass that around, and there are some pens in there if you would like to use those as well. How much time do you usually give for these presentations?
3 or 4 hours.
Okay.
Well,
as I mentioned, there's a lot of information in here. So, I always say this when I give a presentation: if you have a question, please just interrupt me and ask your question at that time. I used to teach 7th grade English, so I know what it's like to be interrupted. And that's a great way to learn, is just learn on the fly. You remember, what was it, Rorschach? Mr. Cotton, Mr. Gunn, just go just interrupt me and ask your question?
Chris, I'd say we kind of generally try to end about 12:15-ish.
Yes,
So,
okay.
If you want to build in some Q&A time, up to you.
Yeah, I'll go very quickly through some of the material then, because I also have folders for you. I made 10 folders. If I need to make any more folders, if we're short, just Scott, let me know and I can make some more folders and send them to the church. So if you'd like to take a folder, my full presentation is in there. There's other information in there. You'll have a letter explaining how you can give securities like stock to the foundation, so the local church doesn't worry about that. We don't charge anything for that. There's the 2020 stewardship report in there. It gives you some idea about the investments. And we should soon have the 2021 stewardship report. And then on the other side is my presentation and then some materials that explain some of the giving plans that I'll be talking about.
Under your chair.
So a little bit about the United Methodist Foundation. We were established in 1949. We are an independent 501c3 public charity. And what we do is, remarkably, as Art was talking about, we're 2 full-time staff people, but we're much more than that. We're really a network of many individuals and organizations and service providers and churches and donors that provide many services that you can see here in the bullet points. Primarily, we do investment management for local churches. About 45% of the money that we manage belongs to local churches. About 30% of the money we manage belongs to the annual conference and Church World Service and other agencies. And then we have charitable remainder trusts and charitable gift annuities and permanent funds of the foundation that benefit the foundation and local churches and others. So we can help local churches with endowment, genesis and growth, trustee and custodial services, planned giving programs like this morning, donor consultation.
Keep talking. I'm sorry to interrupt. I forgot to share.
Oh,
the
yes.
Zoom to this. So while you talk, just take a second. So anyone who sees this later, they can see the slides while you talk.
Stewardship development, financial best practices, and then ministry grants and scholarships. So every year we have a grants committee that gives typically $2,000 per grant application. And we can have anywhere from, it might be 30 applications to 70 applications, depending on the year. It's all done online, and that's been a great boon to the number of applicants that we've had. We have permanent funds that are designated by donors and by the board to fund the grants ministry. And this year, I think it was about $40,000 that we gave in January to local churches. And we also have an agency category now for small nonprofits to apply for grants. One would be Kurt's Cafe. Are you familiar with
Yes.
Kurt's Cafe?
Yeah.
So this year, Kurt's Cafe was the recipient of a $2,000 grant from the foundation.
Almost there, it's big. There it is. Okay, sorry about that.
It's okay.
There you go.
The foundation is independent from the conference. We receive no financial support from the conference. That is our name. We're the United Methodist Foundation of the Northern Illinois Conference. It's a mouthful, I know. But that marks our primary constituency, the local churches, the conference, and the conference itself. But we are independent from the conference. There's an independent board of directors. That's where the connection is that the delegates to the annual conference elect our board of directors. But other than that, we're completely independent. At the end of last year, we managed about $99 million across hundreds of accounts. And we're about 92 or so, thanks to the market. But it's just a huge blessing to be able to help churches invest their money responsibly and according to the ethical principles of the United Methodist Church. All directors are currently United Methodists. We have a diverse board of directors. We shall have at least 15 and no more than 21 voting members. And laypersons shall be at least 75% of the board membership. I'm going to start with some last words as my first words, and that is this benediction from Hebrews chapter 13. I don't know, Scott, is there a way to get rid of that? Can I minimize that?
No.
No,
Okay.
oh,
What
sorry.
did you get?
Well,
You can drag it.
oh, there we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's an adventure with this team. Doing Zoom and PowerPoint.
For here we have no lasting city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. Through him, then, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God that is the fruit of lips that confess his name. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. Now may the God of peace, who brought back from the dead our Lord Jesus, the great shepherd of the sheep, by the blood of the eternal covenant, make you complete in everything good, so that you may do his will, working among us that which is pleasing in his sight, through Jesus Christ, to whom be the glory forever and ever. Amen. So we get from this benediction, I think, some of the themes that I preached on earlier today, that our life is temporary. Yet we yearn for eternal life. What we have, we can't take with us. No one's figured that one out yet. One of my things that I've done on the side is I'm a badge volunteer chaplain at Stateville. And once someone who's serving life there in Stateville told me, you can't take U-Haul to the grave. Have you ever heard that? You can't do it. But sharing and planning for the future makes us complete. You might even make an amen for that. Amen. No? No?
Click on the slide. I think you're clicked on Zoom.
Oh, gotcha. There you go. Thank you, Scott. As I shared this morning, Christ models love as legacy. This is how much that God loved the world, that he gave. This is really what we imprint on God's divine nature as a giver and as a lover. Jesus is the model for our actions. And because Jesus rose from the dead, in that model, we know that our stewardship in our Christian life extends beyond the present time. I have a feeling none of you were alive when they built this sanctuary in this building in 1915 or somewhere around there. So people that came before us made this all possible, and we're called to the same life. I'm going to start with a blank slate here and just hopefully compel you to think about your generosity within a quadrilateral. You're a good Methodist, right? So you know the quadrilateral. This is kind of the Walters quadrilateral. You know, in churches, we're very good at talking about budgets and bills and buildings and that kind of thing. Anybody relate to that? I want to try and transcend the normal conversations of how we talk about giving and what I call budget, buildings, and bills. We have to start with the cross. We have to start with the God who gave everything, who gave his only son, Jesus Christ, for us. And then we go to the most natural thing in the church, which are the people. The people are the church. The church are the people. And everything that we see around us here is an expression of the church, who are the people that have gone before us, the people that we are now, and the people that will come after us. The people make the church, and the church is sustained by regular giving. This is what we focus on a lot in local churches, is stewardship campaigns and a pledging and the budget. But we know the church is involved in many other ministries. Some of the ministries are contained within the four walls of the church. Some of the ministries the church is involved in exist outside of the local church itself, whether it's through the conference or the foundation or the denomination, or maybe there's other ministries like you're involved with here, or Kurt's Cafe, other ministries like that. And I call them ministries because they're serving others, they're caring for others. Rosecrans, that was started by some Methodists 100 years or so ago in Rockford. I think that's the largest organization in the Midwest that does addiction recovery services. Yeah. Rosecrans, and they have locations all over Northern Illinois and I think Iowa now too.
Yeah, they do.
And the North Shore, they relatively recently.
Yes, yeah, they have a new facility here. Justice for Our Neighbors is another one There are different chapters all across the country, and they provide free, high-quality legal services for immigrants. And I've been involved with Justice for Neighbors for several years. There's so many things that we do as the church. And we do it because, as I mentioned earlier, because we're philanthropists, because we live out of our love for humanity. The one part that we don't talk about a lot is this other quadrant here, the legacy quadrant. We're very good at talking about this part, especially this part. Maybe we talk more about this, our purpose. But a lot of the time we don't talk about this other quadrant that I think when we put all four together, we make our generosity complete. And I'm just kind of geeking out a little bit here with the theology, but there are different components to how we think about our generosity. There's the visible part. Stuff that we can see, people, real people, that's embodied as philanthropists. That's stuff we do that's embodied. But purpose and legacy, that's kind of invisible. And then there are emergent things that we do. And so these four things all have to interrelate with each other to make our generosity complete. In churches, we often talk about giving some portion of our income. Tithing is 10% of our income. Sometimes we say, was that before or after taxes? Okay, if you're asking those questions, you're not really thinking in terms of tithing. Do it before or after taxes. It might not all go to the church. You might give 1% to the church and 9% to something else. It's just a good rubric to have, I think, to put some container around your generosity. If you give out of a sense of obligation, that's a beautiful thing. If you give because it's a spiritual discipline, that's okay. Me, I personally give just because, like I preached this morning. When I married the pastor 22 years ago, and she said, you know, we have to tithe. And I was giving not hardly anything at that time. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I guess I do have to tithe. And just did it right away and never looked back. It's all on autopilot. It all goes out to different things like the church and other ministries. We're very good at talking about this pocket of giving, the income pocket. But today I'm going to talk about the other two pockets of giving, which are the much larger pockets, accumulated assets and then legacy giving. Cliff Christopher, who's a United Methodist clergy and started Horizon Stewardship, I love this. He said, you know, churches and religious organizations used to get like more than 50% of all charitable giving. Now we get about 32%. So it's still the largest chunk by far in the pie chart. But we only get about 8% of the state gifts. And Cliff said, as far as I can figure, God gave you all those treasures. They were not given to anyone else, just you. And you are responsible as his steward to determine their disposal. And why is there such a disparity between 32% and 8%? Because we don't ask. So I'm here today to ask you, have you left the church in your will? If you haven't, think about it. There's no compulsion. It's all by God's grace. It could be everything. It could be some percentage. It could be some fixed amount. But as we heard this morning from Ellen, do you remember her name? All right. That was a perfect testimony. Perfect. This church has been everything to her in her life. If you have any experience like that with the church in your life, what better way to express your faith and your generosity than leaving some portion of everything that God's given you to the church? This is why it's so important to talk about this. This comes from the Census Department. I need to update this slide, but I think this really shows quite dramatically why it's important to talk about these things. This goes back to a comparison between 2014 and 2013. This is the average net worth by asset type of a US household. And no surprise here, most of our wealth is wrapped up in our home. And then retirement accounts. And so these are both areas of our financial lives that we don't get from them on a regular basis because we can't. I mean, your wealth is wrapped up in your house that you got to live in. Your retirement accounts, of course, when you get to retirement age, then you're going to be living off of those retirement accounts. And then you can see the other categories here. And then I created a little inset here that I got from the Federal Reserve that shows you what percentile you might be in. So if your net worth is 10 million or more, you're in the top 1% on 2016 numbers.
Raise your hand.
You know, if you're, you know, in the top 10%, 1.2 million. You know, so I share that because we're super blessed. You know, we might be all across the spectrum here, but it just gives you some idea of how much responsibility we have to dispose of our assets when our time comes. What is legacy planning? Well, it's management of accumulated assets. You know, I kind of made a little bit of a joke there with the bird pooping the seed all over it. And I paralleled that to people like me and attorneys and wealth advisors and tax accountants and that kind of thing. But it's super critical work. Those people are there to help you be as responsible as you can with your wealth and to carry out your plans. Whether they're charitable plans or other plans, inheritance plans, whatever the case might be, there are people, there are professionals that dedicate their lives to doing that important work. It's an enduring statement of your faith. It's a provision for loved ones, children, grandchildren, so on. It's support for mission and ministry, and wise and spiritual stewardship of accumulated goods. These are the main pillars of what makes up a legacy plan. And what drives your decision making? Your core values. My mom has drilled into me over and over again. When you get married, make sure you marry someone that shares your core values. You ever say that to your children? Don't marry for love and lust, because if you're going to be around a long time with that person, if you got that, that's great. But really, your core values, that's where it's at. That's so important. What are your core values? If your core values is expressing your faith in Jesus, then what did I preach earlier? Just do it. Get it in there. What are you passionate about? Do you want to see your plans make an impact now or later? How specific do you want to be? Who's going to carry on your legacy? That's why we exist as the foundation since 1949, to help you carry out your legacy. If you want to benefit the church or charities now, there are several things that you can do, and I'm going to go through them one by one. Direct giving, we're very familiar with that. Give and appreciated securities, that's very easy. A local church doesn't have to have a brokerage account where the church administrator is checking the account every day and doing sell orders. I don't recommend that. Some churches do that, but we'll do it for you, and there's no cost to that. We've facilitated more than $1 million in the last 4 years or so to churches from people giving appreciated securities. You can bypass capital gains. It's really, and you can itemize it as a deduction. So it's really a great way to give. It has to be directly transferred to the charity like the foundation. Donor advised fund. This is an irrevocable gift to a charity such as the foundation. And then you can advise how it's invested and advise its distributions. So it's kind of like having your own little mini foundation. You get the tax benefit when you give the gift, and then you can let it grow over time, tax-free, and then advise its distributions. So it's irrevocable. And legally, we don't have to follow your advice, but we follow your advice. And so we manage a handful of donor advised funds where people may give us appreciated stock. And then they pay their church pledge from that. Or they give to their university or whatever the case might be. And then we'll execute their instructions. The charitable lead trust. Now here, remember I said it gets complicated. This is a great way to fund like a capital campaign. Someone could put assets into a trust and have the income pay the church or the charity for a set number of years, and then it can revert back to their estate or say their children. And it's an excellent way to take advantage of some tax rules where you create the trust, we manage the trust of the trustee, and then follow the words of the trust. Permanent funds, these are very common. You can give directly to the foundation through a gift agreement and say, I'm going to create the John and Mary Smith Permanent Endowment Fund for the music program, or for such and such church, for general operations, or whatever the case might be. Recently, I had a lady who's a member of the temple, and I hope to get her story. She's very close to agreeing to share her story. She's had a fascinating life. She's gone all over the world. She met Bishop Tutu twice. She's been everywhere. Well, she's getting on in years, and she decided what she wants her legacy to be. So she gave $100,000 to create a permanent endowment fund to alleviate world poverty, education programs. And so for the first 5 years, it was Pencils of Promise. I never heard of Pencils of Promise. They provide educational services for children all over the world. And she met the founder of Pencils of Promise. And she was so taken with him and their organization that for the first 5 years, it will benefit that organization. Look it up. It's wonderful. And then I got a phone call from her nephew that said, oh, she was really thrilled by this opportunity. Well, I'd like to contribute to that too. And then so now seeds are being planted. This is an excellent way to do something where you can experience the benefits here and now. You get to see how your gift is being put to work in perpetuity. And here are some ways that we can benefit the church or charity later, and I'll go through these one by one. First, doing something in your will. There might be events that happen in your life where you should review what's in your will. Your children have grown or married and they've got great jobs, and maybe even their kids got great jobs and everything's fine. And I know I've had these conversations with my parents, and my parents don't have a lot of money, but they got a little bit. And I tell them every year, like, the three of us don't need any of your money. Why don't you do something? This is ongoing conversation. So they feel obligated to take care of the kids. And like, you know, Mom and Dad, come on, like, you're on in years, do something that you want to do. Don't feel obligated to us, we're fine. My brother's the dean of university libraries at Virginia Tech. He's done very well in life. He doesn't need the money. I don't need the money, my sister doesn't need the money. Mom and Dad, let's have a conversation. I would love for you to do something charitable. They're thinking about it. I'm going to see them next week. Actually, you're driving down to Oklahoma to visit them, and I'll give them the spiel again. You may have lost a spouse or a loved one. That's the time to review your plans. You may have gotten divorced, or maybe you got married or remarried. Maybe you moved to another state. Laws are different in different states. You might have to update your plans. You may have a change in your financial situation if you're a business owner and you sold the business. My Uncle Wade down there in Oklahoma sold his pipeline business and his cattle ranch. And he has got more money than he can count. That's a very long conversation. His financial situation has changed. He cashed in his chips, and I would love for him to do something charitable. We'll see how that goes. What do you do when you draft your will? Well, you're listing your assets. Identify the people, charities, and causes that you want to remember. Name an executor. We have some people that have named the foundation as a successor trustee in their living trust. So they might not have adult children or other family. They might have friends that name as a successor trustee, but if those people can't serve, they can name the foundation. Anytime you do any of this, I highly recommend consulting an attorney. You know, LegalZoom's very good at the commercials and all that, but really for a few $100 or $1,000 or a couple thousand, whatever the case might be, to do a lot of this stuff, it's just better to go to an attorney and have them do it right. When you plan a gift in your will, you have to decide some basic things. Do you want to restrict its purpose? 10% is going to create the John and Mary Smith Permanent Endowment with the United Methodist Foundation to benefit North Shore UMC. Okay, there you've restricted it as an endowment. This amount after the estate settle is going to go here to create the endowment to support this church. Or it could just be, it's going to go directly to the church. Here's $100,000, it's going to go to the church, unrestricted. No designation on purpose. It's not creating an endowment fund. It's just going to go to the church, and then the church has to figure out what to do with it. That's a huge blessing, but also sometimes it creates some, you got to figure out, well, okay, what are we going to do with it? Have policies in place. That's a different presentation. You're going to state an amount or a percentage. How are you going to structure the gift? I suggested some of those. You may create a charitable life income plan for a child or a grandchild. So there are a lot of different things you can do in there. Consult an attorney. Your will is your faith legacy. Writing your will is the most important step you can take to plan your estate. See how it's underlined, it's bolded, it's italicized. I can't state that enough. Some of you have already done this. That's great. If you haven't done it, what's today's mantra? Just do it. Just do it. Just take the time. It takes some time. Get a reference to a good estate planning attorney and just do it. You will feel a lot better. My wife and I got married in 2000. We had a kid. We didn't have any of this in place. And we looked at ourselves and thought, oh my gosh, every Friday we take a day off and we go driving around while Tim's in school. I'm like, what would happen if we got in an accident and got killed? Well, so we went to an attorney in the church, Bob Whitley.
Oh, sure.
And Bob put our plans together for a very nominal price because he's a gentleman. I felt and feel a lot more secure now that those plans are in place and family members know where the plans are and that kind of thing. It's so important to have these things in place. Retirement accounts, this is really easy. You can just log into your Fidelity account or whatever, beneficiary, North Shore UMC, Glencoe, done. Put some amount in there, some percentage, and then when your time comes, that financial institution will follow those beneficiary designations. And sometimes it's not quite that simple, but it's pretty much that straightforward. Life insurance, this is less common, but you can sometimes convert life insurance into a charitable gift. And if the insurance is continuing, you make provisions to fund the premiums, and there's some tax benefit to that. Or if the policy has some cash value, let's say, then you can convert that into a charitable gift. Again, this gets more complicated. Talk to a professional, but this is another way to make a gift. And then finally, a charitable remainder trust. We have a few of these at the foundation. You give money to the trust. The foundation manages the trust as a trustee, and then we make income payments to you based on a percentage like 5 or 6% for your lifetime. And then at the end of your life, the remainder goes to who you designated in the trust, which could be the foundation, the grants program, a church, church world service, whatever the case might be. Oh, last but not least, one of my favorite topics, the charitable gift annuity. This is really a great way to kind of have your cake and eat it too. Take some assets that maybe have appreciated a lot in value or cash that's earning you zero, and then fund a gift annuity that pays you income for life for 1 or 2 people. And then at the end of your life, then it goes to the church or the foundation or wherever the contract designates. The rates can change, but we follow the American Council on Gift Annuities, their maximum rates, as do like 98% of the charities that do charitable gift annuities. I think if you're age 82 as a single life, it's 7%. So let's say you gave $100,000, we pay you $7,000 a year in perpetuity. And then the math works out that roughly about you invest the money and then about half or so would be left over as a charitable remainder. So it's a great way to do a gift to get tax benefits here and now and maintain some income and get all of that stuff accomplished in one gift package. Here's what it looks like. let's say you're 75 years old, you give $20,000, we enter a contract, your rate would be, currently it's 5.4%. So you would get $1,080 for life, and that could be twice a year or quarterly or once a year. You get some tax benefit in the year in which you give the gift, and then some portion of the income, most of it is tax-free when we give you the income. And then you can designate who it benefits as long as it's within our United Methodist family. Because of time, I'm probably not going to go too much into the endowment part of this presentation. But I do want to talk a little bit about if you have any endowment funds, if it really is a true endowment, or even if you just call it an endowment, and you treat it like an endowment, you need to have several things put in place. Like a spending policy, it needs to be invested as a prudent investor would do. That's the prudent investor rule. In other words, you're not just going to put it in CDs, or you're not going to put it all in Apple or whatever. You're going to diversify it. It's going to have a healthy mix of stocks and bonds. You're going to have a spending policy that says we'll take 4% of the average 12 quarterly balances, and that's where it goes. You know, that's how much is available. And why is it important to do all that? Well, here's a chart I got from Fidelity that this is about retirement, but it's still, this principle applies to endowments. An endowment really is in perpetuity. So if you have an endowment or you create an endowment, it's supposed to go forever. And it's so important to have some prudent percentage, like 4%. This is a chart of 50% stocks, 40% bonds, and 10% short-term investments. This person retired in 1972. And you can see what happened to their money. They had $500,000. And even at 5%, now this is cherry picking the time, but starting in 1972 with the half and half portfolio, by the time they got to about 88, the money was gone because of the market and because their distribution was really, it wasn't sustainable. This is why you hear in the retirement world, there's a lot of talk about the 4% rule. Depends on your situation. But the same portfolio over the years at 4%, you'd be up here. So it just shows you the dramatic difference between these paying a higher percentage and this more prudent percentage of 4% based on the historical averages. And this is important. I share this because churches should know this kind of thing if you have anything that is an endowment or you call endowment. And I won't go too deep into this. This might even be a whole nother presentation, but it's important to have policies and procedures in place. So if you want to make an endowment gift to benefit the church, I recommend you just do it through the foundation. Because then it is sacrosanct. It's a permanent endowment fund that will benefit the church. A lot of churches have funds they call endowment, and they treat it really like the rainy day savings fund. An endowment does not mean that. Endowment is a legal term according to state law that says the money is not wholly expendable. So if you want to establish an endowment fund, you can do it through the local church, but doing it through something like the foundation is probably better over the long run than the local church, because pastors change, leadership changes, people forget what that was, and
And just to add real quick there, so we have 5 investment funds with Schwab, the church does, we've had for several decades. Each of those funds has rules that were set at the creation of those funds, and we do scrupulously follow those requirements. But the Stewardship Task Force of Finance are visiting about, UMF and whether do we keep those at Schwab long term? Maybe we put them into UMF. But however you choose to do it is great. You give it to us. We'll follow those rules very carefully, or you can go through UMF. If you wish to endow funds, but just letting you know it's an active conversation we're having.
absolutely. And then I'm kind of in the home stretch here, and Scott kind of just touched on these a little bit. If you're going to do endowment campaigning, or you raise funds for an endowment in a local church, there's some strong things you should have in place, like Scott was talking about. You got to have policies and procedures in place. You got to have objective money managers in place. There's just things that kind of the plumbing that needs to be in the works before you can accept or create a gift like that. Because you're beholden to, I love this, the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, UMFA. 49 states, including Illinois, have some version of a MIFA in place.
Who's the state?
Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Pennsylvania as the state does not have a MIFA in place. And in the interest of time, I won't go too much into those. I think that's it. I want to have time for your questions. It's a lot, it's a huge amount of information, I understand. It's all in your folder and some more in there. You have my information. This is my cell phone number. On the website in my business card, I have my Google Voice number that will go to my cell phone, but this is my preferred direct cell phone. Don't.
Carolyn Cook is still there.
Yes.
The real power.
Blows my mind.
The real power behind the throne.
So this is the worst kept secret in the conference right now, Art, is that Carolyn is retiring at the end of this year.
Oh my gosh.
Carolyn has worked for the foundation since 1980. And as
Yeah,
Art can testify,
she's great.
Carolyn has been and is in so many ways the foundation. And she's got the most incredible memory of anybody I've ever known. She knows everything and can remember everything. And so it'll be impossible to replace her.
Talent when it comes to class actions that have to be registered to follow it, stuff like that.
She knows everything.
Effects securities, saved the foundation a lot of money over the years.
So Chris, how can, just real quick, but how can you help people with their giving? Could people call you or speak to
Absolutely,
you?
yes. You have my information. If you can email me, you can call me. Just about everything we do, other than the class or whatever, you know, if you don't mind me saying, you paid $75, we're paying $300. So a lot of that kind of stuff we do to provide educational things. So that has some cost to the participant, like a stewardship, some of that kind of thing. But just about everything else, any consultation, any review, any way that I can help you resource attorneys or anything like that, talk to our investment professionals, that is all free. Everything we do is powered by the money that we manage, the balance fees that we collect, which are pretty reasonable. And that's almost a whole nother presentation itself.
I have a quick question, which is, how does what you do relate to, like, if somebody has a financial planner, or do you all provide financial planning services? I mean, clearly you do in one way, or do you work with people's financial planning?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
So it seems like we always have something in the works, and usually these take a long time.
Yeah.
Or somebody's thinking about something, usually an endowment, and they're working with their wealth advisors and accountants and that kind of thing, and they're trying to figure out how they want to structure it on their end. And then we come at the back end, and then we have a gift agreement in place, and we work with their advisors to make sure that everything is done properly. So a lot of it is kind of preloaded by the individual's advisors, and then we act as that organization that carries out their plans. Yes.
Thank you.
Chris, what about you? Should also just touch on InvestNet and the reporting capabilities you now have.
Yes. So since 2015, the manager of the stock portfolios is InvestNet's quantitative research group. And I don't know if you know, but InvestNet is a publicly traded company that was started by Jim Lumberg and some of his friends from John Nuveen. It's based here in Chicago. Jim used to serve on the foundation board many years ago, and then he left InvestNet not long ago and started a boutique investment advisory firm, South Pole Advisors, who's our advisor. And Jim is phenomenal. He goes with me all the time to local churches via Zoom to help churches process decision-making, investment choices. So everything that we do has many, many layers of fiduciary oversight and accountability. From the investment advisors, the managers, the investment committee on the board that has professionals. You really benefit from having all those layers of fiduciary responsibility in place when you work with the foundation. And local churches, sometimes you have people in the local church that can do a lot of that stuff. But really it does require those levels of accountability, I think, to make sure everything takes place as it was intended by the donor. But if you invest through the foundation, whether you're a donor advised fund or a church client, It's all available online. You can have people log in to download statements and look at the activity. Everything's electronic now. All the documents are digitally scanned, everything. It's, you know, we're all in the 21st century now.
Great.
I'm very pleased about that.
Question.
Yes.
If it doesn't cost us anything to consult with you, how do you make your money?
Through balance fees
And what are balance fees?
on the investments that we manage.
So,
So like an average registered investment advisor would charge you, the average is about 1% that they charge you on top of what the portfolio managers charge. We charge 65 basis points, which is 0.65%. After $1 million, it's 0.5%. So the money that we manage, that's local church money, conference money, church world service, donor advised funds, all that. We take a balance fee every month that funds our ministry, that pays our bills, and that enables us to do all of this stuff, quote unquote, for free.
okay, so basically you charge less than what a private,
Yes.
and that would be part of the.
Yes, some
the draw.
churches, they have their guy, whatever, and they go to, you know, somebody down the street or whatever that works for Edward Jones or something. You know, they're probably paying a higher fee structure than they would through the foundation. Thank you for asking those questions.
Other questions?
I get a question.
Yes.
If I make a designation that executes after I die, what is the benefit of interacting with your organization?
Well, here's a perfect example. I had a gentleman that was getting 9 years and not so well in his health. He was the largest contributor to his church at $24,000 a year. And he knew when he died, this was going to be a pretty big hit on this little church out in our western part of the conference. So I met with him and his son. He owned a local bank. Well, he gave us a substantial gift and created a temporarily restricted fund that 1 year after his death would pay $24,000 a year. So we invested the money, and God willing, with the market, that fund will pay, maybe even in perpetuity, that amount of money. So he's able to do that because we exist as his organization to carry out his legacy plans. Because we're a public charity, he can do that, and the money can grow without tax implications. So you could do that through a trust, but then you got to pay a trustee to manage the trust and so on, and that's more expensive. And you know, here when you do it through the foundation, well, then you're benefiting the whole wider church, because then it enables us, by managing money, to do everything that we do.
But what if the money is not available until you pass?
Well, you can, in your gift agreement, you could make that. That's exactly what we did. So we had a gift agreement. He checked a box, temporarily restricted fund, wrote his directions in there. 1 year after my death, this will pay $24,000. And we literally made the first payment last month in February. So every February, we'll take $24,000 from that fund. It's growing over time and pay that church in his
But
memory.
couldn't that be a specification in your will?
Yes, it could. But who's going to carry out the plan? The church. I mean, you could give it to the church with those directions. And then
But
you
couldn't I
need,
leave it to you in my
Yes.
will?
yes. You could put that in your will, and you could do the same thing. You could say, this is going to create depending on the amount of money and the assumptions of how much is going to pay out, you're going to create the endowment fund for this purpose. And if you designate a certain amount, well, then it's a temporarily restricted fund, because if I went back to that screen with the 4%, is it going to be enough to endow a preset figure that you decided? If your will, you named, well, this X amount is going to go to the foundation to pay $10,000 a year to the church, but you give $100,000 from your will, well, that will go for several years, but it won't go forever, because 10%, 10,000 out of that initial amount is probably not enough. but you're still creating a gift that would pay many years. So a lot of it just has to do with the math.
So you could specify a percentage, which
Yes,
if I die next year would be higher than if, God willing, I live to be 95.
yes,
So, you know, I could say I leave X amount, but it might not be there depending on,
if someone just said, this is gonna create the John and Mary Smith Endowment to benefit the church, then whatever money that is that comes in, it's gonna go on the board set rate. Every year we evaluate the investments and we have a spending policy and we follow, it's all math. Inflation, the returns, da, da, da. So the money goes in perpetuity. But someone could also be very specific in their plans too, as well. And that's where we can have a conversation, talk to an attorney to see what, you know, how it works. Yes,
I have a question. What if, using your example of the man that, a year after his death,
yes.
what if the doors of the church, that church closed before that money was given to the church? What happens to it?
Like in his case, he did not specify, he did not give instructions in his gift agreement for that. So the board of directors will have to make a decision about what best follows his intent. Because his donor intent reigns supreme. And I talked to him about that, but he didn't, you know, he felt it's okay. You know, some questions churches have, well, what about United Methodist Church? We leave the conference, or
Right.
whether you're on the right or the left.
Right.
Well, then the board of directors decides, not the conference.
Got it.
Because that money was given to the foundation that's independent from the conference. So then the board of directors has to decide, okay, like their church, let's say they leave.
Yeah.
Or this church, let's say you, whatever, we don't know how it's gonna shake out.
There's a lot
But
of
if someone leaves a legacy gift like that to us, then the church leaves, and we go, well, this person gave it to benefit this church at this address.
Mhm.
And just because they left the United Methodist Church, doesn't mean that now this goes to the conference.
I see. Okay.
The
Yeah.
board of directors is deciding, according to state law, what follows best to the donor intent.
Because there is a lot of uncertainty in Methodist
There
Church.
is.
The whole process.
And
so
that's
you can
another,
make specifications that say that, because I think a lot of us came as members from a church that may still exist, but doesn't meet our needs. And so the same thing could happen.
the donor could say, should this church close or merge?
Right.
Anything that I'm not comfortable with, then it shall go to
So we
support
could at that
Encore
point
or
just
something else.
Make a specification that goes to
Absolutely.
some
Because-
charity that we
Yes.
believe that is
And we have those plans since
global beyond
1949.
just a functioning church.
So we're required by state law to execute the donor's instructions. That reigns supreme. And that's why it's important that we exist to help the church, the people, decide what they want to do, because there's a lot of uncertainty. And if somebody wants to carry out their plans, they can be very specific, and then we're going to follow those plans.
Yeah.
And we have an attorney, we have a retired judge on the board, you know, investment professionals. You know, people like Art that used to serve on the board. We have people that know how important this is, that we are going to follow the donor's intent and what is written down in a legal instrument.
So perhaps we have more control than we have when we leave it to our children.
Yes.
God knows what they're gonna use it for.
Yeah.
And we've been there too before, where so-and-so did something to benefit the church and the family says, oh, mom and dad never told me that. Sorry, but here's what they did.
I've seen that too at a different
Yes.
church. A man left a significant gift to a capital campaign. And then he suddenly died, literally a week after doing that. And then the children stepped in and reverted the gift the next week. You know, but it was his explicit wish that go to it. So it can happen.
And in theory, then, depending on what was in writing, the beneficiary, the church might have some legal standing. But it depends.
It was verbal,
Okay, well,
you know,
that's,
at that point, but because he was in the process, but it was clear that that's what he wanted. It's
Yeah.
just, it was a messy situation, but it can happen, you know?
And that,
Yes.
that just also emphasizes the importance of sharing your will with your family members in advance.
Yes.
Right? So you know
Amen.
what your intent is.
I didn't say that earlier. I usually have in my presentation, I went through really quickly. But that is so important. Please talk. That's why I talk about my own family. Just talk about it.
Yeah, you have to do that.
Could you tell us, just in brief before we conclude, how, because I think it's a key point, how UMF ethically invests?
Well, we follow the social principles, so we have to make a conscious effort, which we take very seriously, to screen out all the sin stocks. You know, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, private prisons, gambling, pornography, you know, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
But then we also screen in companies based on environmental, social, and governance factors. The companies that are doing better than their peers within their sector of the economy. And then we, you know, if I could show you the numbers, but the large cap portfolio has exceeded its benchmark for 5 years now since we moved to InvestNet, pretty substantially. It's essentially a passive approach. We don't try and guess, oh, you know, like not long ago, energy was way down, so let's go into energy. Well, that would have been a great decision. This year, it's up 32%. But we don't play that game. We just adhere to the benchmarks and then put those screens in place. And we track the indexes because, you know, 80% of active managers don't beat the indexes on any kind of consistent basis. They might get lucky here and there, even if they have a 3 or 5 year run. But active management's a really hard game to play, and it can be expensive. So we take a passive approach.
Thank you. Other questions?
Thank you so much. I know that's a huge like firehouse of information.
Make sure you get a folder.
No, but
Reach out to
what was good
Chris.
was
He'd love to visit with
How
you.
much trust
Thank you.
you can have in the system. And that's very reassuring to know that there's trust there. And that you're not worried about,
Have a good day, everybody.
oh gosh, I gave that money.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
I have to front.
Absolutely, yes. That's what we're not for 73 years now.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Don't hesitate to call me.